Michigan Wolverines are flying high, coming off another dominant victory over Indiana, as Ashley Bastock from the Toledo Blade joins us. And Ashley, despite the Wolverines playing really good football for the last month, they really were quite humdrum, if you will, on Monday. No one was goaded into guaranteeing victory, and Jim Harbaugh was rather as dull as his khaki pants.
Yeah, and that's probably been one of the biggest criticisms of Jim Harbaugh since he's been at Michigan, is that rivalry week feels like any other week most of the time in Schembechler Hall. But as you said, no one really saying too much of anything, no one wanting to give Ohio State bulletin board material. Ohio State definitely doesn't need it with how well they've been playing this season, and it was about as straightforward as you can get without actually saying anything.
Now, a few weeks ago, Don Brown did make the concession that Michigan has been preparing for Ohio State throughout the season, that they've been putting things in that the players might not have necessarily realized was in preparation for the game. So maybe that is one small sign that Harbaugh's changed the preparation a little bit.
Well, and Don Brown did make the comment that Ohio State better also watch out because we're hitting our stride too. I think that was on Michigan's in-house podcast that he said that during the bye week after Maryland. But I think we've heard Don Brown say that throughout the year, that the Michigan defense has worked on certain things, not necessarily just the week before. Like they started working on Army and the triple option stuff they had to work on during spring ball. So that's not necessarily out of the ordinary for me as far as what Don Brown has said about their preparation, but maybe a little bit more than we've heard in past years.
Certainly one of the interesting subplots going into the game is the fact that Don Brown, the defensive coordinator for Michigan, will be coaching. And on the other sideline will be two former assistants of Don Brown, of course. We're talking about Greg Madison and Al Washington. And you also have Matt Barnes on the Ohio State staff, who was a grad assistant at Michigan about 4 or 5 years ago as well. But when Washington and Madison left Ann Arbor, there were certainly some bitter feelings. Now, Khalid Hudson did backtrack a little bit on that this week, but certainly some of those guys that were under Washington and Madison last year, they're going to want to show those two guys what they can do this week.
Sure, and in the spring, no one was really holding back in talking about those departures. Jim Harbaugh said him and Madison wouldn't be exchanging Christmas cards based on where Greg Madison went. Aiden Hutchinson, after the spring game, said that Madison leaving felt like a betrayal. And then Chris Partridge said between the two losses that Michigan ended their season on and those departures that he had blood in his mouth coming into this season still. So nothing like that on Monday. Khalid Hudson said that he's excited to go out there and play against them, but those guys made decisions for their families, for their careers, and that he wasn't holding anything against them. Carlo Kemp basically said even less than Khalid said, so nobody, again, giving Ohio State bulletin board material as far as those departed coaches go, but those players are ready to go out there and hopefully stick it to their former coaches.
Another piece of motivation for the Michigan Wolverines, we found out that there were T-shirts made that Jim Harbaugh passed out with last year's score on the T-shirts, and another reminder for that team what happened a year ago in Columbus. And I guess some of those T-shirts are still around. They're in team meeting rooms, they're in locker rooms that these guys have not forgotten 62-39.
Yeah, and that definitely has sat with the players more than anything. And you think back to a year ago, Michigan went to Columbus as a 4.5-point favorite, and they got demolished. And they were the top defense in the nation at the time, and that was the most points that any team has put up against Michigan in regulation in the program's history. So really astounding and kind of an unfathomable defeat in more ways than one. So that final score has stuck with them. Carlo Kemp, Khalid Hudson especially talked about that on the defensive side of the ball, that those guys haven't forgotten that, and they're ready to kind of go out and get some redemption. And Don Brown now has talked about that game many, many times. In the spring, he called it the worst moment of his life, one of them anyway. And then he talked about squeezing out those last 19 minutes and how different the season could have looked at the beginning of this year. So that score definitely a big, huge motivator. And Carlo Kemp, I think, was the one who said, you think about that in January or when you're in the weight room or in spring ball. So definitely still with them.
Other side of the ball, Shay Patterson, back-to-back 300-yard passing games, 5 touchdowns in the win over Indiana. Shay Patterson is playing his best football of his career right now. And an interesting statistic, Shay Patterson has never lost a game in the Big House. Coming up Saturday, he's going to be the underdog, but he is playing such good football right now.
This might be the best football Shay Patterson has played in his career overall, and not just at Michigan. He's thrown for 750 yards over the last 2 games and 9 touchdowns and just 1 interception. So really, really just fantastic play from the Michigan quarterback going into the most important week. And they're going to need that kind of production for him again if they want to go up against Ohio State's #1 defense in the country. So definitely a tough task there for him to keep that winning streak alive in the Big House.
One interception against Indiana. The point was made repeatedly during the telecast of the Indiana-Michigan game. Big reason why Michigan's been able to turn things around. Turnovers, 14 turnovers beginning of the season, just 2 turnovers since the Penn State game. We talked about that ad nauseum beginning of the year. How can you control the turnovers? They have finally done that last month.
Exactly, and I think that's part of the biggest, maybe the biggest reason for this offensive resurgence, because it allows the players and Josh Gaddis to get into a rhythm, especially with him calling plays. So they found a way to cure the curse of the fumble, as Gaddis called it early in the season. And again, going up against this Ohio State defense, they're really going to be tested. Chase Young is the best pass rusher that they've faced, and that's going to be a huge test for this offensive line. And he's coming off of a career game with his 9 tackles. So definitely a big, big test for that Michigan front in protecting Shay Patterson.
Certainly one way you neutralize Chase Young, you get the ball out quickly, you get it out to the receivers, and Michigan's wide receivers are playing really good right now, and this might be the best receiving core the Buckeyes have gone up against this season.
And especially with Nico Collins. He's coming off of a career game at Indiana. He had 165 receiving yards, the most he's had since last year's Ohio State game when he had 91 and 2 touchdowns. So really fantastic play for him. The matchup I'm going to be watching is him versus Jeff Okudah. I'm going to assume is going to be on him for most of the time, but Ohio State also has Shaun Wade and Damon Arnett, who might get some time on him there. They all have 24 tackles and I think 5 or 6 interceptions between the 3 of them. So it will definitely be Nico's biggest challenge as well, I think. But with the way he's been playing, he just overtook Ronnie Bell as Michigan's top receiver this season. Again, they're really going to need more of that connection from Nico Collins and Shay Patterson if they want to pull off the upset.
Now, neither one of us are meteorologists. I've never played one on television. The weather could be a factor coming up on Saturday. Right now they are calling for rain in the forecast, which theoretically that's going to hurt a passing attack, and that means you need to run the ball. Historically, whoever runs the ball best in the game wins the game. Michigan's rushing attack has not been stellar the last couple weeks, but it hasn't needed to be stellar either with the way they've been able to throw the ball.
Exactly, and I think that's been the biggest reason, but Michigan hasn't rushed for more than 100 yards as a team in the last 2 games. So they'll definitely need to diversify that offense a little bit, but against Notre Dame, we saw them do that. They really controlled that ground game early and often, and it ended up getting them a win in that game. So the adverse weather, I think this particular Michigan team is not afraid of. They had a little bit of it against Indiana on Saturday, and it didn't really affect them at all. And I think Shay Patterson likes it at this point. And I guess if you're the Michigan quarterback, you kind of have to like playing in cold or rainy weather.
Now, we have seen Michigan get off to slow starts. You remember, Indiana was up 14-7 in the second quarter on Saturday. If the Wolverines get off to a slow start Saturday against Ann Arbor, that could be big trouble, the way we've seen this Ohio State offense really gel. Although Ohio State kind of was slow going against Penn State. It was only a 7-0 game until late in the second quarter. We saw them get off to a slow start against Michigan State. We saw them get off to a slow start against Wisconsin. So I don't know if I'd be shocked if this is a low-scoring first half.
And I think it's super important for both of these teams to get off to a fast start. It's how, Michigan would avoid or would, I guess, pull off the upset, but it's how Ohio State could get upset on the other side of that. And especially with these two teams, it's cliche, but you never know what's going to happen in a rivalry games. You look at the over-under, though, and this game has gone in the over for the last 15 times these two teams have played. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a high-scoring game either, but definitely the fast start is going to be very important for both of these squads.
Michigan Wolverines have only beaten Ohio State twice since 2001, but a lot of Michigan fans are pointing to what happened 50 years ago, 1969, Bo Schembechler's first game. There's been a lot of similarities between Ohio State and Michigan in 69 in 2019. Wolverine faithful are counting on another monumental upset for the Michigan Wolverines. We're going to take a break here on College Football Weekly. We want to thank Ashley Bastock for joining us tonight.